funding social and affordable housing is certainly the best way to solve the crisis. The real problem is a question of scale. So at the moment, the 1,200 units per year is going to be a big improvement, but we really need to increase that to between 5 and 15% really of all new supply per year should be coming through as social and affordable housing.
The BCA report today looks into a number of solutions and recommendations such as planning and infrastructure reform, tying housing targets to population growth, as well as build to rent. What do you see as some of the key elements in boosting housing supply?
Yeah, it's an interesting report. I had a look at the recommendations. Certainly increasing the build to rent sector is a way of looking at how we might increase affordable rental supply. But we know from the international evidence and experience that that's not a guaranteed way of improving affordability. And to do that, we really need to make sure that we grow a sector, building up, in fact, from the build to rent sector that we've already got in Australia, which is community housing providers, affordable housing developers, and make sure that if we are able to transition to build to rent, that a proportion of that housing is actually dedicated for people on low and moderate incomes.
And some of those other areas are planning and infrastructure reform?
Yeah, it's got to be part of the picture. We've talked about planning reform in Australia for 20 years. In fact, the states and local governments have enacted a lot of planning reforms, many of which have made a big difference. So if we look at the composition of new housing supply in Sydney, for instance, over the past 5 years, we can see that a majority has been in the multi-unit sector. With that comes more complicated development sites and, again, no guarantee of affordable housing outcomes unless we require them.
So, Nicole, should housing supply be tied to population growth? Would something like that work?
They already are at the moment, so we do project population growth and we require councils to demonstrate that they've got enough land to meet those targets. But what we don't do very well is make sure that the infrastructure funding to support that growth is in place.
So how do you incentivise developers and builders, public, private, to build more supply?
We've actually seen over the past 5 years or so, just starting to pause when interest rates rose, we can see that the biggest incentive to increase housing supply is rising prices. And unfortunately, that's the problem with Australia's housing system. It's dependent on house price inflation to trigger new house building. We need to step it back and to better align our housing production process to increases in population. And we do that by increasing the proportion of new housing that's supported through government subsidy in the form of social and affordable housing, and perhaps in the types of incentives that are being called for when it comes to the build to rent sector, provided that they go on to secure affordable outcomes as well.
Can we learn from the past at all? So I know not long ago that there were much higher rates of production.
We had much higher rates of social and affordable production, actually, even all the way through to the mid-90s. Over 10% of new housing supply was being supported or delivered by government in some shape or form. We contrast that to today, when less than 2% in a good year of new housing stock is being produced in the form of social and affordable housing. We also saw in the past governments play a much bigger role in de-risking development sites and producing affordable land for development, and we probably need to see a bit more activity in that area as well.
If you were publishing a report today, what would be the key steps that you would see as necessary to help to start to fix the problem?
Well, number one is investment in social and affordable housing supply, as reconfiguring our housing industry so that it's responding to population growth and change rather than price rises. Number two, of course, is providing adequate financial subsidies to low-income renters and those rental protections that are really critical. And number three would be making sure that wherever we're pushing things on the demand side, so we haven't talked about the significant investment we're making in the form of negative gearing to support the private rental sector, making sure that demand-side investments have an affordable supply-side return.
Nicole Gowan, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.